All right, well, welcome. This is a new charted course for us today, obviously. And if you haven't heard, my name is Chris McDaniel. This is Chris McDaniel's America, as always, with me, Jack Fairchilds. And this is the Midnight Ride Network. Now, you might wonder, and I did at first, why the Midnight Ride? Because you think, clearly, there's a historical purpose behind the name, right? Yeah. And I got to thinking about that today, about the Midnight Ride and why it's important to this show. And there's a reason. There's a reason. If you think about the ride, it took place in 1775. And Paul Revere had planned intelligently, which is a key element here, intelligently, a method with other patriots about how to make sure we knew when the British were approaching and how they were approaching. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So you've heard the story of the famous ride.
Oh, we all have, yes.
There were other parts of the rides. Yeah, you know, they put, there's the old story about 2 by sea, 1 by land, the lanterns in the North Church in Boston. Long story short, Revere, he leaves Boston. And he's trying to make sure that the colonials have some advance warning of the British regulars approaching. They're going to Concord. They're trying to raid a military barracks and some ammunition there. He concocts a plan, the Midnight Ride. They did it smartly, the Midnight Ride, and it worked. You know, people don't realize that Revere was actually captured at one point during this ride. Then they released him, silly British. Silly British. They released him. Not that the capture mattered a whole lot. The point of the story is this. He was able to alert the people of the country, the colonial army, that the regulars were coming, the British were coming. And he did so with intelligent resistance. That's the key to this network. It's the key to this show, intelligent resistance. And you might say, what are we resisting? We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's talk about the show, the purpose of the show, what we are and what we are not. Jack, you and I have done radio a lot over the years.
We've talked together a time or two.
And we've had shows that were somewhat bombastic and shows that were designed to get ratings. And, you know, that came back to haunt me a couple of times in campaigns over the years, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you know, you sometimes you get carried away and you say these things, and that's part of good radio, right? Mm-hmm. It happens. And it's going to happen here. So I want to warn the people out there, no matter what side of the political calculation you think you may be on, we see things differently than just red versus blue.
Yes.
Now, that's important. Don't get me wrong. I've been a Republican since I was 13 years old, and you can tell by the wrinkles on my face. That was a long, long time ago. But we see things differently than just red versus blue. There's got to be more than tribalism here. There's got to be more to they stink and we don't. Yeah. Because both sides are guilty of that right now. So what we want to do in this show is to pound out a philosophical basis for why it is we're conservatives, and to do so with intelligent resistance. And you say, what on earth are you resisting? Well, the same thing the founders resisted. Tyranny. You say, for goodness sakes, what does that look like? I don't know, too much government. It always results in the same thing, which is tyranny. So we start with the resistance, but we have to ask ourselves why and what's the purpose of the resistance. And it really is a foundational principle based on philosophy. And that's going to drive some people crazy because they always think that conservatism is just a moniker. And it's just there to support the Republican Party. It's really not. It's been here for over 200 plus years. Philosophers like Burke, and Jefferson even, and others, Hayek, Ron Paul. People say Ron Paul's not a conservative. Of course he is. He has that founder's impulse in his body. And so we want to develop a system to educate people as to what true conservatism is and what it is not. And we'll talk about that. So first of all, let's define what the show is not. We're not going to be a mouthpiece for the Republican Party.
No, not at all.
This is not Fox News. Now, don't get me wrong. Fox News occasionally has a kernel of truth out there, right? But at the same time, it comes at you with bias, just like CNN, just like MSNBC. That's not who we are. We're not a mouthpiece for the party, and there's a reason for that. There's nothing the party has that we desire. Now, think about it. There's a lot of shows out there that will twist and turn facts and protect the party even when the party is wrong. That's a problem. And they do so because there's something the party has, something they desire. They don't want to offend a politician that could be powerful. They don't want to offend the party chairman who could have money. They don't want to make the donors mad because they're always wanting to run for something. That's not what this show is going to be. If the Republican Party makes mistakes, we've got to be there to call them out.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%, because I think that's part of the problem nowadays is there's so many people out there that don't understand the difference between conservatism and republicanism, because while there's similarities there, they're not the same thing at all.
They're not. Conservatism is an element of political thought, and I discussed that earlier. It's been around for an awfully long time. And the Republican Party is supposed to be the vessel by which that thought is conveyed. One would think the Republicans would stand for policy and principle, but we've seen over the last 40 or 50 years the Republican Party doesn't have a lot of backbone, policy, or principle. So the philosophy of conservatism has been redefined. I'm not even sure most Republicans know what it means to be a conservative. And we'll get to that in a second. That's going to be a second part of the show here. But let's talk about real quick what we are not. I'm not trying to upset people on the right here, but I want us to get focused. We're losing the country. And we're losing the country, meanwhile, chasing conspiracy theories. Now, when I was a kid growing up, my father was a college professor, and he always said, you can't make an argument unless you have sources. Yep. And I don't mean Alex Jones, okay? Is that bad? Is that going to get me in trouble on this network?
No.
There has to be sources, documented sources. And my fear is this. Elements of our movement have been chasing conspiracy theories. That's okay to a certain extent. But if it becomes your sole being for existence, you're missing out on things that really work to move the needle. QAnon, I don't think there's much to it, frankly. I never have, because I need to see evidence.
Yeah.
But those that are following QAnon, their attention is distracted right now. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
And if they're distracted chasing shadows, then they're not doing things that are beneficial to winning elections. And if we can't win elections with conservatives, it's not going to matter what QAnon does, right? And so you have all these wild theories. I'm not really terribly concerned. This is going to get me in trouble. I shouldn't say this. Are we ready for this? The network's not ready for this. I don't care. It doesn't, and I don't believe it for a moment that Michelle Obama has testicles. Do you?
No, I really.
But there's an element within our group that's chasing pictures on the internet trying to prove she does. Okay, fine, if you want to have fun there, but have you knocked a door? Have you made a phone call for a candidate? Have you really gotten out there and did anything that moved the needle? Yeah, you're chasing rainbows and unicorns, that's fine. But, frankly, I'm not terribly concerned about the grassy knoll. Yeah. I'm not concerned about conspiracies involving JFK Jr. I'm not a bit concerned about this. Is there a pedophilia ring in Europe that we're supposed to be? Look, I know it's bad, and it could very well exist, but we're trying to win elections. And the thing is, if you're focused on those conspiracies, you're chasing those conspiracies, and you're not winning locally, you're losing. And so I don't want to be a show that chases conspiracies. We may discuss it. We're not going to chase it. We may sometimes acknowledge it if there's a truth involved, some fact that comes to light, but we're not going to chase it. We have to hold on to our philosophy, because if we chase these theories and lose our philosophy, we have nothing to offer anybody. And as I understand it, our movement needs young people. I'm pretty sure we're not getting the job done with the youth of this country right now.
No, we absolutely are not. And I think that's part of the reason why this network was being created in the first place, is because we want to try to see if we can capture more. But Chris, what type of audience are we aiming for with this program?
I want thinkers. Intelligent resistance is what we're after here. Thinkers, let me tell you about thinkers. And it seems the world is void of those at this stage in our existence. It seems like we hear an idea we find somewhat objectionable, and without considering the idea, we just reject it. Yeah. Both sides do that. I've been guilty of it as well. So, and frankly, I watch CNN just to see what the other side is saying, and I find myself shaking my head in disbelief. But I'm discounting myself at that stage. Unless I'm willing to dive into the accusation or dive into the fact or the alleged fact and see whether it's true or not, then I'm discounting myself. I'm discounting this country. So the first thing is we have to be discerning. And a lot of shows aren't terribly discerning. They're loud. They're objectionable. They get ratings, but they're not discerning. I would like an audience that's discerning. I would like them to question why I say the things I say. And yes, disagree from time to time, but then promise me, instead of calling me a name, actually do the research and see if what I've said is correct or not. Discourse in this country right now, at least from my perspective, is every time I say something remarkably objectionable, I'm called a racist, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm called a homophobe. I'm none of those. But it has to be more than just accusations or name calling. So I want an audience that's discerning. I want an audience that's passionate. Because without passion, You're not going to be able to take the licks and keep moving forward. You got to be tough. You got to be courageous. So many people in our movement, they talk a good game, but the first time they get punched in the nose, I mean that metaphorically, not literally, but the first time they take a shot, whether it's a name call or whether it's some sort of disagreement, they wilt away.
Yep.
I want passionate people. I want strong people. I want folks that can stand in the line and defend our philosophy. Because here's the thing, folks. If our philosophy goes, it all goes. You can't have America without conservatism. And I know that line's going to be objectionable, but I'll explain that in a second. Because the two philosophies are intertwined. America is an idea. And I wrote about that a couple of weeks ago. America is an idea. It's more than geography. If you look at California, that's a wonderful state, but that's only a fraction of what makes up America. It's the same with Mississippi or New York State or whatever the case may be. The idea behind America is the same thing we're seeking to conserve, leading to the next part I want to talk about. Young people listening out there, you have to understand what's going on here. First, ask the question, what are we trying to conserve? Nobody asked the question. Everybody just says, I'm a conservative. So what do you mean? What are you talking about? And they say, well, I'm pro-life. Okay, good. That checks a box. I'm pro-traditional marriage. Okay, fine. That checks a box. I don't like taxes. Okay, cool. That checks a box. But what are you trying to conserve? Because I tell you right now, the current element of our public school systems, nobody wants to preserve that or conserve that. The culture as a whole, as coarse and as ugly as it's gotten, nobody wants to conserve that. So what are we trying to conserve? And that's a question we should be asking ourselves. The answer? The very principles that upheld the early revolution. What are those principles? Free markets and free minds. Now, young people have never heard conservatism put that way. They think we're a bunch of old people that sit in the back and smoke cigars and disagree and say, get off my grass every time they walk up in the front yard, right? That's not what conservatism is. Yeah. It's free markets and it's free minds. We may have opinions, for instance, on what we believe people should do or not do, but you cross the line from conservatism into fascism or even socialism whenever you attempt to use force to control that behavior. That's the problem. Frankly, I think conservatism is the coolest philosophy in the world because it embarks around the individual dignity of each person, and it tells us that we should conserve a space where politicians don't control us. What? Have you ever heard it put that way? Yeah. A space where politicians can't control us. Politicians use government as an extension of control. That's all they are. They're big bullies. They have big egos, and they love to tell us what to do. They love to dictate to us how to live. Young people don't like to be told what to do. Conservatism respects that. It says, you know what? We may disagree with your decisions, but hey, fine. You enjoy yourself. Now, you have to live with the results. If you do something really stupid, we're not going to bail you out, but we respect your decision as free people, adult people, liberty-minded people, to live your life as you see fit. That's a good political philosophy. Liberalism rejects that, and so does authoritarianism on the conservative side. What does it say? Do as we say. That's not what conservatism is. Conservatism respects differences of opinion and variations of opinion. They want to use government to control us. Wait, is that a bombastic statement? I think it's not, right?
No, it's an honest statement.
Well, consider this. How much of their paycheck do you want? I mean, they take about 40 to 50% every year, don't they?
Yeah.
If I don't have economic liberty, what liberty do I have? I can't feed my family. I can't pay the gas bill. I can't pay the light bill. But they take. That's control, isn't it?
It 100% control.
They take the fruits of my labor. They rip it from me. That's a sense of control. What about the way I teach my kids, the things they're taught in school? That's control, isn't it?
Yes.
What about the COVID lockdowns? Was that control?
Very much so.
Ultimately, the liberals of this country, the modern liberals of this country, are all about using force. Conservatism is a rejection of that force. That's all this is. And they always talk about free will on that side of the equation. They talk about how we're trying to control them. When? Here's the philosophy I live by. Just leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone. Is that a bad political philosophy?
No, I think that's a philosophy that's very, very easy to get behind.
I think young people would love it if they actually heard it,
and understood it.
So look, the idea is, if you think about, this is going to be a funny scenario, right? There's a movie out right now about Bob Marley, right? And yes, conservatives can listen to Bob Marley. It's perfectly acceptable. I like Bob Marley.
Yeah, I'm well aware.
Bob Marley was a man of independence. And he spoke about overcoming struggles. And he talked about one love. And he talked about only independence of the mind can free ourselves, right? What's the song? Redemption Song, right?
Yeah, redemption song.
These are beautiful lyrics from a man who understood individualism. That's conservatism, isn't it?
It is.
I'm not suggesting Marley was conservative, different times, different ideas, but the idea here is to allow people to live and to love them despite their mistakes.
Yeah.
But you have to live with the consequences of your mistakes. Even in that music, you have this pattern of conservative thought. Now, people would reject that. I'm sure some liberal right now is rolling their eyes.
Oh, you know they are.
Prove me otherwise. He was the man that rejected government force. He was the man that was trying to overcome government force, whether it was slavery or Jim Crow, right? By the way, liberals, help me understand something here. The whole concept of slavery and the whole concept of Jim Crow was based on the premise of force. The very force you now embrace. I'm not suggesting you embrace that force, but you embrace a force that could be abused, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And in the conservative mind, we believe the only way to make sure those dark days don't return, those bad days of this country don't return, is to not give the government the kind of power that can effectuate the return. Take it away. More freedom, more liberty, more individualism, less collectivism. That's conservatism. So what are we trying to conserve? We're trying to conserve the American experiment. That is freedom, the idea that every man has dignity, should be treated equally under the law. The crazy thing is, in the present environment, if I say those things, they still call me a racist. Have you considered that?
It's insane. I mean, because nowadays, and I talk about this from time to time, and it drives me crazy because you can't have an honest dialogue with somebody that disagrees with you on the left because they don't want to have an honest dialogue, because instead of sitting down and having that discussion and let's debate ideas, instead of having debate, they go to the name calling. They go to the insults. It's, well, you think that way because you just hate. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, here's the thing. You look back to the civil rights struggle. And those were, those people were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for freedom from governments that did not want to allow them freedom. It's that style of government that we're still against today, right? And so if we advocate for individual responsibility, if we advocate for individual dignity, if we advocate for less government interference in our lives, in other words, less politicians interfering in our lives, by no definition can be considered racist, and yet the common refrain is that somehow we're violating some social norm. The social norm is too much government. The social abnormal behavior is too much government, because that's when people typically are abused by government. So let's keep talking about these traits. Take away the power of the government, empower individuals. What does that look like in the 21st century? And this is a good question. I mean, how do you suppose this show and this philosophy can fit in the 21st century, or the 22nd century, or the 23rd century? And the answer is remarkably well, because liberty is the goal. And it's always been the goal. And as long as people are allowed to achieve free from coercion and free from political influence, you'll be surprised how well they can accomplish things. You'd be surprised what they can do, how much money they can make, how they can educate their kids, just how wonderful society can be if they're allowed to be free. One more component of conservatism is a notion called federalism. The whole country right now is obsessed over Washington, D.C. I think that's a big mistake. I think it's a big mistake. Republicans want to win it so they can control Democrats. Democrats want to win it so they can control Republicans. Washington is the problem.
I agree.
And it always has been. The way you handle the problem of Washington is to diffuse or decentralize that authority. And this is why it's important to do that, and why conservatism demands that. When you have a magnet like Washington, it's powerful, and it's a magnet to all the terrible attributes of human behavior. You may not believe this, but I assure you that pathological personalities love power. Pathological personalities are drawn to power. And you wonder why there are so many messed up minds in Washington, D.C. We've allowed the power to consolidate there. So naturally, everybody rushes there to get a taste of that power, to make those egos feel good. But these are really disgusting personalities on both sides of the equation.
Yes.
Conservatism says the answer to that is don't give them the power. For goodness sakes, the entire government was built on the concept of not giving one man or one system too much power. Decentralize it. Now think about this. Washington is such a cauldron right now of hate and despair and dysfunction. in large part because of the pathology, the pathological personalities that are associated with the system. And so it's so bad that they can't seem to get anything done. That was anticipated. The founders were brilliant. They understood that a diverse country like this with too much power in one location would bring all those negative attributes and that things would break down. The answer, give the powers back to the states. Why is that objectionable, young people? You're a liberal, you're listening to this. What if I told you that I'm more than willing to let California do whatever California wants to do? What if I told you that Massachusetts, I'm more than willing. I may disagree. I may talk about it. I may try to preach to it. But I'm more than willing to let Massachusetts live the way the people up there want to live. But here's the deal, though. You got to let us live our way, too.
Yep.
Let Mississippi live. Let Alabama live. Let Ohio live. Here's the beauty in that situation. If you do that, we're not fighting over Washington anymore. We're not desperate over who wins the presidency. We recognize that power has been destabilized. It's been decentralized. Now the real solutions lie locally. If California wants to allow abortion on demand over there in its state capital, I would disagree greatly, but you must respect that state's position under our system to take that action. Conversely, if Mississippi wants to outlaw it altogether, you must respect the state's position. To me, that's good government. And guess what else it does? All of a sudden now we're not so mad anymore.
Yeah.
We're not up there in Washington standing in front of a Supreme Court chamber with a placard in our hands because now we're at our state capitals discussing it like human beings are supposed to discuss it. That's good government. Better yet, keep decentralizing. Let's bring back some of this power to communities. I don't think there should be a federal Department of Education. It makes no sense to me why anybody in Washington would be trying to educate some child in Ellisville, Mississippi.
And it's not that old of a department either. People mistake it all the time, think that is a department that has been there since the nation founded. It didn't exist before Jimmy Carter, correct?
Jimmy Carter, man, he did so many great things for this country. Didn't he? Now, I'll tell you this about Jimmy Carter. All joking aside, he is a really good person.
Yes.
I mean, his heart appears to be just absolutely beautiful in every respect. Now, politically, no, not a chance. Yeah. And that was a big mistake he made. Reagan ran in 80, and one of his primary positions was going to be to abolish the Federal Department of Education.
Never happened, though.
That's the thing about government. Once you create a department, it's permanent.
Yes, it is.
It's as close to eternity as the good Lord himself. He can't do anything about it then, because then if you try to get rid of it, you hate children. You know what I mean? Immediately.
And I do recall, didn't you get accused of hating children just for saying that once?
I did. I did. I literally have 2 kids.
Exactly.
And at the time, I hated teachers and children.
Yeah, and your wife's a teacher?
Didn't matter. I guess I hate her too. Right?
Apparently so.
Everybody gets hated here. It's an equal opportunity place. The thing is that it just goes to show how coarse the subject debates have become. We're talking about philosophically why it is that some pinhead in Washington should be calling the education shots for children in Alabama.
They shouldn't.
They shouldn't.
It's that simple.
But you say that, and all of a sudden it's demagogued, and all of a sudden you're anti-public education.
Exactly.
I'm not anti-public education. I'm happy with my wife's paycheck. And I hope it keeps coming. I hope it keeps coming in. So I don't have a problem with that. Now, I know some conservatives are suspicious of public education with good reason. Because in so many areas it's been monopolized by the left, and they're using it to create basically a little army of collectivists, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't see that so much in South Jones, in Ellisville, Mississippi. I think we have great teachers there, but we do see it across the country, which is another reason why we decentralize the approach, allow the states to handle education the way they see fit, and I think you'll find some peace in our time. I fear that if we don't decentralize the power and as more pathological personalities rush to Washington, we're going to get to the point where peace is going to become almost an impossibility.
I agree, and we're already getting to a point where, again, because we're losing our schools, we're allowing certain things to take place in our classrooms, and kids are developing different opinions than what are probably the core values of their parents because we're not paying attention the way that we should.
Well, there's anger out there, and the anger is justified in so many ways, but the reason most of the time people feel anger is that they feel like they don't have any control.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to say you have control over a system in Washington that doesn't listen to anything anybody asks them to do. And so it adds to the frustration level. I do believe the anger would dissipate somewhat if you allowed more local government. I think people would at least feel like their voices were being heard. Let's not kid ourselves. Now I'm getting fired up, and this is why I can't say bad words, because we lose our license. They throw us off the network, but I want to say some bad words here. Who trusts Washington to do anything right, much less educate our kids? But think about it. It's frustrating that we have to go through a system that simply will not listen. Do you really believe Washington listens to anything you believe or say anymore?
I know that they do not.
I tell you what, now this is the cool part about this show. I can speak to this from experience. A lot of folks haven't been in office, which is probably a good thing. I am a recovering politician. And one day I hope to be a recovering lawyer, right? But I've been in office. I've been in the back rooms. I've been in federal races. I've been in D.C. I know how they think. I know what they do. I know how they breathe. Those people are despicable as a whole. And they don't care one bit about what your opinion is, not one bit. Now, you bring them a big paycheck, a big donor check, they'll sit you down and listen for a second.
Yeah.
But right now, disproportionately, our government is controlled by big corporations and big donors. And average Mississippians and average folks from Arkansas or wherever the case, they've got zero voice in their federal government. And they wonder why we're so mad. We're only asking to be heard. But we're not being heard. They don't care. I take it a step further. I have been in the rooms where they'll take a position they know the people are upset about. You know what they'll say? They'll forget about it in 4 years. That's the game they play. They're playing you for suckers.
You know what's sad?
What's that?
A lot of times they're right. In 4 years, the voters forget about it. That's why they like to do things year one.
I would disagree there, Jack. I think they're all right all the time because we've seen it.
Yeah.
It's not some of the times they're right. They're making the calls knowing that people aren't paying attention. They're making the calls knowing that their anger is going to dissipate. They're making the calls knowing as long as they raise a couple of $1 million, it's not going to matter what Joe down in Mississippi thinks, right?
Yeah.
And so they create two classes of systems. One class is this political class at Washington, and they're very special and privileged. All the free perks, all the free ball games, all the stock insider trades, right? Then there's the rest of us just trying to live, and they still can't leave us alone, but they don't care about us. That should frustrate everybody. Now, how do you end that frustration? Bring the powers back down locally. At least then maybe we're being heard, because right now it's not happening.
Yeah, it's 100% not happening, and that's the frustration. And those of us that are paying attention and following, I think we get even more frustrated because you're like, why aren't you? Why don't you remember that 4 years ago this guy voted for this? And they just simply don't.
It is the biggest disconnect of all time. And here's how it goes down, and then we'll segue to our advertiser here in a moment, our sponsor. Here's the way it happens. And now, again, these are the types of statements that are going to get me in trouble, again, if I ever come out of my recovering political phase. But I'm going to say this with all sincerity because I believe it to be the case. There's only a small fraction of people paying attention. Just a small fraction. Yeah. The rest, now I'm not necessarily saying this is a bad thing, but they're busy. Some are raising kids. Okay, you get a pass. Some are working their tails off trying to pay their taxes. Maybe you get a little bit of a pass. I don't know. But there's a lot that just don't care. And I take it a step further. These are otherwise normally good people, but when it comes to the political process and the facts as they're being described by the political process, they're completely ignorant.
Yeah.
Think about it. The greatest connection of the disconnect I can think of is that you have people right now that are so mad. They get on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. Is it X now? It's X now. Yeah. They go to these social media outlets and they just curse and they behave and they're so mad. And they say the system's killing us and the establishment's killing us. And what's the first thing they do is to reelect the establishment every single year. Yep. Every year. So we find ourselves wondering, what are these people doing? And the answer is they're not paying attention. No. It is ignorance. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just ignorance. When you can't even think twice about why it is an incumbent has a built-in advantage monetarily and where that money could have come from in the first place, and why it is he's not listening to you, and that you still vote the same people in and year out. That's not draining the swamp. That's perpetuating the swamp, and you're guilty of it. You get the government you deserve. And if you're not going to engage this government, engage this system, and actually make a change, you're going to keep getting the same government. That's one thing that frustrated me as a politician. I get all these emails, and everybody's so mad. And I always ask them, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. It's the most frustrating thing in the whole world. But yeah, I take it back. Maybe they do. They have boat rallies, and they wave flags over interstates, and that's fine. But have you knocked on the door? Have you made a phone call for somebody? Yeah. Have you actually put the sweat equity into a race to actually make a difference in the campaign? The answer is no, and no, but I'm going to get on Facebook and complain, right? Well, Jack, I understand real quick, we need to thank our sponsor. And I'll tell you about this. I've always admired this person's capitalistic tendencies, and I understand he's actually given us a pillow.
Exactly. Let's talk about MyPillow for a second. MyPillow is quite simply the finest pillow on the market. MyPillow's patented interlocking fills adjust to your individual sleep needs.
It sounds like you could be reading that.
I probably am. And I'm on camera, so I think they can see.
You need to sleep on it and give us an honest appraisal of what you think about MyPillow.
Which I will.
Okay, do it again. I'm sorry.
I will sleep on it very soon. But it gives you your sleeping position. The innovative fills then hold that position all night, helping you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. The founder and owner of MyPillow, Mike Lindell, personally guarantees that MyPillow will be the most comfortable pillow you'll ever own. And after I sample it, I'll add my own personal guarantee real soon. And now you can get 80% off of all MyPillow products, including bed sheets, slippers, towels, down comforters, mattress toppers, and even coffee when you go to MyPillow.com and either enter the special promo code Midnight Ride with no space in between midnight and ride, or simply go to MyPillow.com/Midnight Ride for the discount.
That's good. Well, I tell you, I think it's worth the purchase for sure. And if he's helping this show, he's taking a big risk.
That's 100% accurate.
So we should do our best to
especially since I had to read directly and then get called out by it.
We should do our best to help him. By the way, go back about halfway down where you're talking about the comfort part of the pillow. What did that say about laying next to it? It was very comfortable. Can you find that line?
It says that
you read it slowly?
My patented interlocking adjust, or MyPillow's patented interlocking adjust, or interlocking fills adjust to your individual sleep needs regardless of your sleeping position.
But there was something else about comfort. There was something about like feeling really, really comfortable.
The innovative fills hold that position all night, helping you fall asleep faster.
Say that again. That's it. That's the one. Say that again.
All right. The innovative fills holds that position all night, helping you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer.
That's how Mitch McConnell sees his donors. That's why we keep losing elections, because I can see somewhere in Washington right now, Mitch McConnell climbing up in bed with these donors. Then I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that literally. I don't want to get super liable. I'm just saying. Now, with that said, before we go into a critique of the GOP, I will point out that toward the end of this show, we have a segment, and Jim Zagelski helped create this segment, and I think it's wonderful. It's a Midnight Ride original, and it's the Rhino of the Day, or the
it's Chris McDaniel Rhino Hunter.
That's even better. That sounds dangerous.
Yeah, you didn't realize you were an official hunter. I mean, you've got an arsenal behind you, so I think people can see.
I need a hunter's uniform now, but that's true. I've got guns back here.
That may or may not be part of the vision that Jim and I have come up for you on this particular segment. I may have just spoiled something for you, but I think that's the vision.
I think I've leaked that Mitch McConnell might be our Rhino of the Day.
Well, I mean,
I'm going to get on him in a second.
There was a safe bet that he was going to be the first one.
All right, so this is going to be another uncomfortable segment as we segue into the Rhino of the Day, because it does talk about my beloved party, the GOP. Been a Republican my entire life. I remember when I was just a kid watching Ronald Reagan speak, and I was mesmerized. Granted, he was a great deliverer of speeches, and he had this wonderful personality, but also he was appealing to my inner independence when he spoke these conservative messages, right?
And he had this sense when he spoke, a way of making you feel comfortable.
Well, consider too, though, put that aside just for a moment and think about the language he used, the words that he used. I'm 13 years old. I'm trying to be cool like any 13-year-old kid, but there was still something appealing about that message of liberty, which is why I still think it works. I think if you deliver it right and they hear it, I think liberty-minded conservatism is the answer to infusing the Republican Party with a new kind of voter that will actually get out and do things for them. And Reagan did that for me. Did it for my father as well. Now, like most Mississippians, I think we became Republicans generally at first because of the social issues. But then I began to research and study that being a conservative is really a lot bigger than social issues. And we talked about that earlier. So the question then became, which party better can take that mantle of conservatism and move it? Goldwater tried in 1964. And look, let's not kid ourselves, but for Goldwater in 1964 and his book, The Conscience of a Conservative, we never have a Ronald Reagan.
That's true.
And I still today believe that the Goldwater book is one of the finest political books I've ever read. And if you haven't read The Conscience of a Conservative, go get it. It's short. It's a primer. It's worded and written remarkably easy to read, and it has these consistent eternal truths in it that apply even to this day. You know, even if you look at Goldwater's argument in 64 against the debt that was mounting then, a fraction of what the debt is now.
Exactly.
Put those numbers aside, read his arguments as to why debt is bad. And so Reagan used this book, and he took the mantle for Goldwater, and he began to campaign for Goldwater. We lost in 64, but we won in 80 with the same style of campaign. And that, to me, was true republicanism, true liberty-oriented republicanism. Now, it countered with the other faction of the party, which were the big Northeastern bankers. Okay, that was the establishment then. But they were willing to deal with Goldwater and deal with us because they needed our votes. Now, they don't believe the same way we do. They want to use the force of government to prop themselves up. They want to use the force of government to take care of their friends in the donor class and to maintain corporate dominance over individuals. That's a problem. But our wing of the party assumed dominance between 64 and 80. And then we had this great speaker. He couldn't always deliver what he said. We'll be the first to say that Reagan had flaws in that sense. Perhaps it was his fault, maybe not. He had to deal with the Democrat Congress and Tip O'Neill on the other side, and the country may not have been quite ready for the reforms he was offering. But at least he had the guts to talk about those reforms. What do we hear now? I haven't heard a Reagan-type speech in an awfully long time. I haven't heard a Goldwater speech probably since Goldwater in 64, right? So I'm trying to figure out where the party is, and I think I know where the party is. I think I figured it out because we have taken a lot of kickings over the years. Now, what do we do as Republicans? Whenever we run for office, we always want to be seen as the most conservative candidate. So we campaign on Goldwater's promises. We campaign on Reagan's promises. What are those promises? Okay, balanced budgets. Over the last 40 years, has the Republican Party been a good steward of your money?
No.
40 years. Let's look at it. When Reagan was running, back when my friend Mitch McConnell first was elected, I think he entered the Senate in 1984. The federal debt was roughly $2.5 trillion. It's $34 trillion now, and growing $1 trillion every 100 days. Now, our party has been in control in large parts of that time period. Mm-hmm. I don't mean just partial control either. I mean, there were parts of this time period we controlled every branch of government.
Yep.
But more importantly, we controlled the House, which is where revenue bills and spending bills are supposed to originate. So despite all their lip service to balanced budgets, despite all their talk about holding the line, despite all their talk about responsible spending, what's happened? We've lost and lost and lost. But you don't lose if you're principled because you can hold the line when you hold the power. They never had any intention of holding the power. And here's the problem with that approach. We used a lot of time and energy earlier talking about how government is the problem because it expands in places it shouldn't be. And when it expands, it takes away, if you will, rights of the individual. It's hard for the rights of the individual to coexist where government is. It really is. So how do we determine the size and scope of a government? That's a good question for conservatives. The answer, by what it spends. By what it spends. So if that's the answer, the Republican Party, despite all of its talk about being balanced, all of its talk about responsible budgets, all of its talk about cutting, really hasn't done a darn thing in about 40 plus years.
That's accurate.
Why?
Well, if you're asking me, in my opinion, I think it's because they don't really care to do anything. They would rather cut deals, and every time they cut a deal with the left, they get nothing in return. They just give up ground. We never see any ground made back up.
Every deal cut moves the state or the federal government to the left. I can't think of a single deal cut. Now, if you can, anybody listening, if you can think of a single deal cut in the last 40 years that moved the direction of fiscal sanity toward the right, you tell me, because I haven't seen it.
It doesn't exist.
I haven't seen it. Okay. Now, that's a core Republican principle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been one loss after the other. But I can't really call it a loss. It's been one surrender after the other.
That's accurate.
So what are we supposed to believe? After all these years of being told you're going to stand there and you're going to make government small, and every time you get control, you expand the size and scope of it. Okay, that's a core Republican principle. It's a core conservative principle. It's been jettisoned.
Yep.
So what do we believe? What about just individual liberties, right? I mean, do we keep creating more agencies, or are there less agencies?
Oh, there are way more.
Do we keep empowering those agencies, or do we take power away from those agencies?
We expand them.
And yet we've had control over the entire apparatus at certain points in time for the last 40 years. What did we do to roll back the administrative state?
Nothing.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out what the Republican Party believes. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me be clear here. I've been a Republican since I was 13. But the answer, you can't simply say because the Democrats suck. That's not an answer anymore.
No.
Because if one vehicle, the Democrat vehicle, is going toward the edge of a cliff at 80 miles per hour, and we're going toward the same cliff in the Republican truck at 60 miles per hour, I assure you the result will be the same for each. Yep. And that's exactly what's happened. We've chased those people to the left. We've fallen from their arguments that government can do all these magnificent things, and we have failed, to, even for a second, to listen to core Republican beliefs, as articulated by Goldwater and Taft and Reagan, to push back against those people and turn this tide. So part of me, I'm dissatisfied, and I don't trust them anymore because I keep hearing this talk, but I don't see the results of the talk. I'll take it a step further. Mississippi, a super majority Republican state. Mm-hmm. Let's put that in perspective. You can't find a Democrat here.
No.
I mean, they're rare. Every statewide official, Republican.
Yep.
When I say super majorities, I mean Republicans are falling off trees in the Senate and the House, right?
Yes, that's accurate.
We just passed Obamacare's Medicaid expansion.
We did.
We just passed early voting, right?
Yep.
It's going to get a lot worse, folks.
Yeah.
These aren't Republicans. They're pretending because they know they have to pretend because the folks that don't know, aren't paying attention, can't catch them in their ruse and the games they're playing. These aren't Republicans. They claim to be Republicans. The problem with this is the rest of the country sees them as Republicans, and don't you think they see the hypocrisy? I've often wondered if a young person sees true courage and intent, is that more attractive than weakness? I think it is. I think it's just human nature. I think if I'm 15 years old and I'm trying to watch a guy and I want to emulate him, I want to emulate somebody that's going to stand there and tell me something and be strong about it. I think that's attractive, as opposed to a Mitch McConnell, for instance, who can barely articulate 3 sentences without sounding like an old, frumpy man.
Yep.
And you wonder why we can't get converts over to our party. They see us the way we have allowed ourselves to be seen. We don't take stands. We don't have principles. We get into fights on the internet, but we don't do anything policy-wise, and that's why this show needs to be about intelligent resistance. If we lose the policy, if we lose the intent of the country, the intent of the movement, there's nothing left but a socialist type or socialist tendency style government. And some may say, what's wrong with that? Well, I don't know. Ask North Korea. Ask North Korea what's wrong with it. Ask the Soviet Union what's wrong with these modern-style central planning government concepts. They failed every time they've been attempted, and it's not a coincidence that we are failing as well now. Somebody's got to speak up.
Well, Chris, what exactly can the GOP do to try to regain the trust of conservative voters?
Well, how about this? You know, if we're going to take this country back, it's not going to be in general elections. We have fallen for that trap time and time and time again. I'm going to tell you a little story. In the Deep South, the Republican that wins the primary is going to be the U.S. Senator from the Deep South.
That's true.
So why don't we keep running these milquetoast people that don't have any core convictions? More importantly, why does the party allow it and fund it and defend it?
Because leadership can control them.
Bingo. It's all about Mitch McConnell.
Yep.
That was a great segue. We're getting good. Here's the thing about that.
We've done this before, huh?
What happens is every single chance they get, they're going to put a puppet in that position. You think I'm being harsh?
No. I know you're being honest.
I know these people. I know them personally. You may have 3 backbones in the entire United States Senate. The rest are there to be told exactly what to do. Now, you may say, why is that? Money. It's that simple. They can raise money when they follow the leader. Follow the leader. But here's what that gets you. It gets you Mitch McConnell controlling the whole body. And that's why we keep sliding to the left. Look, they get elected, and I don't know. I can't speak to everything about these people, but I know them pretty well. Remember, many of them are pathological, and they have these massive egos. They're people pleasers. They want so badly to be liked. That's what drives them. Mm-hmm. Well, to have an office makes them feel accomplished. It makes them feel liked. It makes them feel self-assured. So when they acquire the title of senator or representative, they feel like they're loved. Maybe they weren't hugged enough as children. I don't know what's happening here, but now they feel like they're loved. They're not. People love the title, not the individual. Yeah. They can't seem to discern that very intelligently, but they want so badly to hold the title, they'll do anything to maintain it. What does that include? It means telling you one thing on the election trail and then going into a back room with Mitch McConnell and voting just the opposite.
Yeah.
Recognize that Mitch McConnell has the power and the money to pull you out and win that race when you run for re-election. Primaries is how we take this country back, not generals. We got to win primaries with conservatives. And we have to focus on more than just presidential races.
Absolutely. And I think that getting folks to get involved in these primaries and understanding that you can't just continue to vote for the guy that you have always voted for, because that's the problem. That's 100% the problem. You have to start studying their records. You have to start looking at the things that they have been doing and what they have done while they were in office. You can't just vote for him because, you know what? I like Johnny's name. I've always voted for him.
One of the things we see in Mississippi is, well, you know, he knew my papaw.
Yep.
And he got me on Medicare.
Yep.
Whatever the case. And the next thing you know, the guy could be betraying you on every core principle, but he sure was a good fisherman. And when I met him that one time, he shook my hand. Every politician has a good handshake.
Yeah.
Every politician has a good smile. Well, not every. Most do. And it's like these people fall for this spell. But here's the spell. The politicians acquire power so badly. They want it so badly they'll do anything to keep it. And that does include lying to the people. These are con men.
Mm-hmm.
They're people pleasers. But the one person they won't displease is Mitch McConnell or any leader of any administrative or government body, because that person controls the committees you're on.
Yep.
He controls whether your bills are passed. But more importantly, he controls your campaign contributors. And if you will go and you'll kiss the ring, hold on one second, if you go and you'll kiss the ring, I assure you they'll raise you as much money as they'll have to raise you to make sure that any upstart challenger like McDaniel in 14 has no chance. And if they can't win straight out, they'll find other alternative ways to win, which includes bringing Democrats to a Republican primary to win the race. Mm-hmm. Not that I still think about that. That was a long time ago.
No, I doubt you do.
But here's the thing. Now, let me just keep going for a second. We got to get out of here. We're getting close to the end here. I'm getting fired up. One more point I want to make on that, because we spend so much time, money, and effort focused on the presidency. And don't get me wrong, the presidency is an incredibly awesome position, and I hope Donald Trump wins outright.
Yes.
But if you acquire that one position but then lose the others, you have acquired nothing.
Yep.
I can understand why folks don't get that. The president doesn't write the budget.
No.
He doesn't. And yet people think he does. There's a House and a Senate that does that. He has to approve it ultimately, but when was the last time the president vetoed a budget? More importantly, when was the last time they actually passed a budget? It's so dysfunctional, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, we get so caught up in this red versus blue and so caught up in a single election every 4 years, we neglect the real power structure, which is the Senate and the House, and yes, your state capitals. Because guess what? If you found a strong conservative leader in your state capitals that had a strong conservative legislature, now the states can push back against the apparatus, which, by the way, is another conservative principle of state sovereignty. It's a balance of powers. Federalism and the separation of powers work brilliantly to protect and defend individual liberty, right? You have the three branches of government, and they're supposed to equally push back against each other with their own ambitions, their own cares, and that's supposed to protect us from tyranny. But also the vertical separation of powers, the states and the federal government. The states have to push back, but we can't do that because we're so preoccupied with one race, we don't even get involved with our local races. And so the establishment controls every aspect of the system. The establishment is the problem, and it's not just one man. There are a lot of them, and women, that maintain their superior order over conservatives. And as long as they're in control, folks, it's not going to work out for us. Now's the time.
Absolutely. As long as the politicians are more scared of leadership than they are of the people, nothing's going to change.
Fear and money is all they understand. It's the reptilian brain. Mm-hmm. And it really is. It's like if you're a politician, the only thing you respect is someone that can hurt you, that can take away your votes, that can, and that's either fear because someone is holding them accountable, or it's fear because somebody's raising money to contest them. Outside of that, you have no political capital in politics, none whatsoever, unless you can bring fear to the table. That sounds awful. But these are the way these animals operate. This is the way these egos operate. They want to be loved. They want to be hugged. They want to be taken care of. And what they fear is losing that title more than anything. But you got to be able to bring that fight to them before they'll listen. And right now, they're not listening at all. And speaking of a man who never listens, Mitch McConnell. Now, apparently, this is the segment for the Rhino Hunter segment, right? Chris McDaniel, Rhino Hunter, is that what we're calling this? There are so many. This was a tough call for me because there are so many rhinos now, not only in the state government, and we're going to get to you. It's coming. You may think you're too small of a political office not to get called out. You are about to get called out at some point in this program. But right now, let's start with a big guy. Let's start with the big turtle there in D.C., Mitch McConnell, okay? Mitch has been there for an awfully long time. I think he was first elected, let's see what my notes say, I think it was 85.
Wow.
85. So he is a creature of the Senate. He styles himself after Henry Clay, the great compromiser. Well, that might have been fine in the 1800s, my man, but you've compromised enough.
I agree.
How much has Mitch McConnell compromised? Let's look at this, because when he first arrived, the national debt was a minuscule, about $2 trillion. Since he arrived in 1985, he has been part of an apparatus that's added over $31 trillion to it. Now, you might say, well, that's not all his fault. He was just one senator in the middle of this mass of immorality. But yet he was the Republican leader for several years, wasn't he? The Republican leader back when we held control over the purse strings. And these numbers are striking because the national debt increased by $25 trillion since he became the Republican leader in the Senate. Did y'all know that?
No, I did not know the number.
How do we measure the size and scope of government? By the number of dollars it spends. Mitch McConnell could have stopped that at any point in time. A real Republican would have stopped it at any point in time. Barry Goldwater would have, or Reagan would have given it a shot. Now, Reagan got upside down a bit. It's just a crying shame to me. The only time the budget's been balanced, it seems like in my lifetime, was Bill Clinton's presidency. How messed up is that, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, Mitch McConnell has been there all this time, but he hasn't lived up to his promises. Why is that? Why do you suppose that is? And why do the people of Kentucky, God bless those people, how do you send us Rand Paul with one U.S. Senate position and this guy with the other U.S. Senate position? Have I missed the memo in Kentucky?
Apparently so.
I think I can answer it. I can answer it. One's a principled guy who does the right thing. The other is an unprincipled operative who brings money home to the state of Kentucky. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's not kid ourselves. He's a big spender. And he doesn't have to be conservative, because when it comes right down to it, those folks in Kentucky just want those projects, right?
Yep.
And that's part of the problem. Now, people try to defend McConnell based on the United States Supreme Court appointments of others. And they try to say that he was a big part in maintaining the court's current conservative position. My mama had a saying when I was a kid, you're not supposed to applaud a dog when it barks. That's what dogs do.
Mm-hmm.
They bark. That's what the U.S. Senate leader for the Republicans would have naturally done, is to make sure the president's appointments are secured.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that a conservative win for us, doing what exactly he was supposed to do in the first place?
It's not. It's just
not
his job.
It's his job. But he's failed in every other aspect because he's so busy reaching across the aisle. You know, even the shots he's taken at Trump. He took shots at Trump years ago, every chance he got. Even the January 6th thing, remember that?
Yes.
McConnell basically said that was all President Trump's fault, remember?
He did.
Now, look, that is also a rejection of conservative policy. Individuals made that decision, right?
Yeah, he did.
Why are you trying to blame Trump for the decision of individuals, for goodness sakes, right? So individuals have to be held responsible for their actions if they do something incorrectly, but you can't blame one man for the actions of all the individuals. McConnell attempted to, once again portraying this collectivist mindset that he seems to enjoy so much. But the people of Kentucky simply can't get rid of this guy. Another reason we know he's a rhino. Every time a conservative challenger takes on one of his anointed, another U.S. senator, what does he do? He sides with the establishment every single time.
And cuts checks for him.
Big checks. And he's vicious. In 2014, he was vicious. He spent a ton of money down here trying to take my head off, and basically did. I'm still living with the scars of that race. Mm-hmm. That was Mitch McConnell. So he wasn't concerned about conservatism. He was concerned about maintaining control. Now, why is that? Let's start wrapping this up, because I'm going to tell you why. Remember, he's the same McConnell that suffers from the same pathological personalities, the same ego issues as all the other U.S. senators. What does he want more than anything in this world?
More power.
Power. What makes him feel special?
Power.
Power. And in this particular position, he even gets a security detail.
Oh, that's sweet.
Oh my goodness, he doesn't have to acquire the presidency,
No.
and he still gets a security detail. 3 or 4 black limos, these black SUVs, and bulletproof stuff, and he feels powerful.
Private plane, I'm sure.
His ego is made happy by the trappings of power. Now, how does he acquire the trappings of power? It's not by advancing conservative positions. It's by holding a slim majority at all costs, even if it means flushing our positions down the toilet. And that's what he's done. He's not concerned about holding the line. He's not concerned about fixing the budget. He's not concerned about individual liberty. He's concerned about his security detail and power. That makes him feel alive. And that's the problem. If you keep electing those egoists to these positions, they'll always betray you to feel alive. And that's who Mitch McConnell is. That's who he's always been. He don't care about conservative principles. He cares about the security detail. He wants the big office at the Capitol. And so long as he holds that, he'll compromise all day long.
He cares about Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell. And that makes him our rhino of the day. And this is the McDaniel Rhino Hunting Hour. What do we call it? What's the name of it?
Chris McDaniel Rhino Hunter.
All right, Mitch. You heard it here first. Not that we can do a thing about it. Because, you have all the money. And the people of Kentucky obviously don't like you, but they still vote for you. It's the strangest disconnect I've ever seen. His numbers are completely upside down.
Yeah, but he wins every time.
Wins every time. Give us more Rand Pauls, less Mitch McConnells. Give us more Ted Cruz and less Mitch McConnells. Give us more Donald Trumps and less Mitch McConnells. That might get us on the right path. But with the same old, one more thing, and I'm going to get out of here. It's time to end this thing. You're a young person, right? You're watching this great debate of parties, this great clash of ideas. And the Democrats have Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. Now, look, I don't believe a word he says. I don't like his politics a bit, but that guy can speak.
He can.
You got to give a guy credit where credit is due. He is a charismatic man. And if he wasn't in politics, he'd be selling something and making a fortune, right?
He sure would.
Who's our speaker? Mitch McConnell? Is he really the guy on the Senate floor giving the young people of this country a vision of conservative greatness?
I would like to see it be you at some point.
Well, that's not going to happen now. I've said too much. This show alone is probably going to take my future ambitions.
That's fair.
But think about it. Optics do matter. We don't have a JFK in our party.
No.
They do.
And if we do, they crush him because he's not part of the good old boy network.
Because he won't join the club. So what do we have instead? We've got 80-plus-year-old McConnell who can barely articulate concepts, much less win over converts. If you wonder why young people look at him and roll their eyes, of course they would. They're comparing him to a great speaker, a great articulator of ideas, and that's what we're up against. And the Republican Party simply can't seem to move past it because the money won't let them move past it.
That's fair.
That's what it looks like. And that's the first episode of Chris McDaniel's America. It's been an honor, and it's wonderful. I like it here. We've had a good time. They've done a wonderful job with this studio. The Midnight Ride Network is going to be a big deal. It's going to have some good shows, and we're going to come here every week or so, and we're going to fight for the things we believe in. And if the whole world gets mad at us, we're going to stand on truth.
We're going to get a few mad at us. That's a guarantee.
Well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that at least somewhere the early ideas, the thoughts that we're conserving, prevail.
Yes.
Because if we lose here, we lose everywhere. And so if the whole world gets mad at us, we're going to stand here and we're going to fight, and they have to get in line. Right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today. I had a good time, Jack. I know you did. Thank you for your help today.
Anytime.
To My Pillow, that was a wonderful endorsement earlier.
Yeah, Mike Lindell, thank you for the sponsorship, and we're looking forward to trying out the pillow later this evening.
It's going to be very comforting.
I believe so.
All right. Well, thanks for having us.
You heard about the fills, right?
The fills?
Yeah, you heard about the fills.
I did.
They can form.
Okay, that's enough. That's enough. Midnight Ride. This is the Chris McDaniel America. Have a good evening.
Hey guys, it's Reed here. I don't say this about a lot of people, but I have to say Mike Lindell is a real patriot, and we could not be more thankful to him and My Pillow for sponsoring today's episode of God and Country. Remember, go to mypillow.com and save huge on a great night of sleep by entering the promo code Midnight Ride. Thanks.